You're worried about me already, right? Like, what are you thinking? I should probably answer those questions right off the bat. Yes, they're all mine. Yes, they're with the same wife. And yes, we know how it happens. So just in case you are concerned about me. But we do have 10, 6 boys, 4 girls, ages 28 to 12. I love them to death, and they're a great platoon to have at home. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here, and I have an opportunity to speak in a lot of different venues, but this is my favorite. And I think it's my favorite because of who the audience is. As I was driving into work today, my office is in Luce Hall, and I went by the track near Rickover and near the Mid-Store parking lot. And I was thinking that all of you on your journey here at the Naval Academy, the finish line is in view. For some of you, it may be the first time it's actually in view, like this is really going to happen soon. But I think you all know that it's really not the finish. It's not the end. Actually, it's the next stage that you will start of a journey that's very, very important for you and for our nation. So I just want to salute all of you for your willingness to serve at this time in our country's history. You're going to do important missions. You're going to be leading important people. And because of that, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time this morning talking about leadership. But leadership's a pretty broad subject, so I'm going to narrow it down, but I'm going to narrow it down by starting with a story about one of those 10 children, our oldest son, Arthur. He's a James Madison University graduate over in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He was recruited to play football there. Somewhere along the way, he realized that maybe he wasn't going to the NFL, and he wanted to begin to think about what's next. And he joined the Army ROTC unit there. I'm often asked about this, like how would you let your son go into the Army ROTC? Well, it was actually the only ROTC unit there at JMU. So he graduates in May of 2006. He has 5 days off, and then he goes to his first school for the Army after being commissioned, and that's the Combat Engineer School at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. He finishes that course, and then he goes to Airborne School down at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then he knows his orders are to the 9th Engineer Battalion in Schweinfurt, Germany. And he realizes, again, he's only going to have a couple of days before he flies to Germany from BWI and gets started. But when he calls the 9th Engineer Battalion in Germany, he finds out they're not in Germany. They're in Iraq. And they're actually deployed in Ramadi, which in 2006, in the fall, was heavy combat. It was part of the Sunni Triangle. It was before the awakening that occurred there. So Arthur's getting ready to fly to Germany, knowing he's just going to drop his pack there, turn around, get on another aircraft, go to Kuwait, and get helicoptered into to Ramadi. And he also found out he was going to be taking a platoon as soon as he got there. Engineer platoon, 40 soldiers. So we had some conversations before he takes off, and one of his questions to me was, Dad, we've talked a lot about leadership over the years. Could you do just kind of a quick summary before I go do the real thing? So I thought, what a great question. Number one, leadership's pretty complex. Like, to summarize it in a couple of minutes before you're getting ready to go on a plane, that's hard. That's a hard mission to be given. And two, whatever I said, I didn't want it to be the wrong scoop to give my son. I needed to figure out, how do you narrow this down quickly to give just something for a young man to think about before he goes and leads a platoon in combat. So I was quickly going through my memory banks, and the story that immediately came to mind was the story told to me when I took my first platoon in the Marine Corps. A friend of mine, a mentor of mine, he was a Lieutenant Colonel, Tom Hemingway. I came into the Marine Corps in 1978. I'm a 78 Naval Academy grad. And Tom had been around the Marine Corps a while. He was a Citadel graduate in the mid-50s. And before I took my first platoon, he said, Art, I want to tell you a story about my first platoon so that you keep in mind what leadership is really about. Yes, sir. So he told me this story. He was a brand new Citadel graduate, had been to the basic school, and he's about to report to his first platoon. What he finds out about his platoon sergeant is he has a gunnery sergeant for his platoon sergeant. This gunnery sergeant had served in the Pacific Theater in World War II as a Marine enlisted and had landed at Guadalcanal and at Okinawa. This individual had received a battlefield commission, but was reverted back to enlisted rank after the war ended. He remained in the Marine Corps, went to Korea, did the Incheon landing, was at the Chosin Reservoir, again a battlefield commission, and then reverted back in rank. And now it's the mid-50s. My friend and mentor Tom takes this new platoon with that platoon sergeant as his key subordinate, right? So Tom was wise enough and humble enough to actually go to the gunnery sergeant and say, Gunny, you probably know my background. If you don't, let me tell you real quick. I went to the Citadel and I've been to the basic school, and I've heard about your background. My question for you, Gunny, is why would you follow me? So there was a chair there. The gunny and Lieutenant Hemingway were standing up, and the gunny looked at Tom, my mentor and friend, and he said, Lieutenant, sit down. So like any good lieutenant, when the gunny says sit down, Tom sat down. The gunny said, let me tell you, there's only 3 questions I'm going to ask about you, and the rest of the Marines are going to ask about you. The first question we're going to ask about you is, do you know your job, or are you striving hard to learn it? Do you know your job, or are you striving hard to learn it? We know you don't know much. That's okay. But we're going to be watching you. Do you study? Do you ask questions? Do you listen? Do you learn quickly? Do you try things? Are you not afraid of failure so that you continue to grow as a platoon commander? That's the first question we're going to ask. Do you know your job, or are you striving hard to learn it? The second question we're going to ask is, will you make the hard but right decision even if it costs you personally? Will you make the hard but right decision even if it costs you personally? We want to know that you're a leader of integrity. We want to be convinced that if the boss has a dumb idea, that you're going to have the courage to go to that boss and at least present a counter-argument and a new option of what to do. We want to know that when it's right, you'll stand up for one of your Marines even if it might cost you. We want to know that you're that type of a leader. So the first question is, do you know your job, or you're striving hard to learn it? The second question is, will you make the hard but right decision even if it costs you personally? And the third question we're going to ask about you is, do you care as much about us as you care about yourself? Do you care as much about us as you care about yourself? Now, when Tom told me that story, he summarized it with 3 C's. He said, those are the 3 C's of leadership: competence, courage, and compassion. And he told me, don't forget it. So I passed that on to my son. Arthur deployed to Ramadi, did a great job there. Now, I don't think it's just because I told him 3 C's, but I think it became a touchstone for him of how he needed to lead. He was awarded the Bronze Star for bravery in combat. He had 2 Iraq tours, now at the Combat Engineer Advanced course in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. He's a fine young man. And I believe that he took those 3 C's to heart, and that is how he led, with competence, courage, and compassion. But here's my observation. Being around the military a lot, but I work with educational institutions, corporations, a lot of diverse types of units and groupings of people. We tend to spend a fair amount of time looking at those first 2 C's, competence and courage. A lot of the professional courses you have here are trying to make you competent as you go out. Certainly for those who go Marine Corps, when you go to the basic school, they're going to try to make you competent. And then you have a lot of character building type evolutions. But I'm not sure we spend very much time talking about the 3rd C, compassion. What it means, what it looks like, and how you actually go about having compassion towards your people. So that's the one I'm going to focus on this morning. And to do that, I'm going to bring us back to 1984. In 1984, there was a #1 Billboard hit. The name of that hit was What's Love Got to Do With It? There was a young lady who won a Grammy Award and actually became famous primarily because of that song. Anybody know the name of that, the person? Tina Turner. Now, when I was a first-class midshipman here, I did an imitation of Elvis Presley on the steps of Bancroft Hall in front of the entire brigade. But I'm not going to do my Tina Turner imitation this morning, some other time. But if you listen to the chorus of that song, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? I believe that that song has relevance as we think about leadership, because if we take the word leadership and bring the word love next to it, an awful lot of leaders would say, what's love got to do with it? But I'm convinced that if you want to be an extraordinary leader, you must have genuine concern for your people. If you want to be an extraordinary leader, you must have genuine concern for your people. Now, I'm not naive. You can win battles, you can make money, you can build buildings, you can win athletic contests, and not have that kind of genuine concern for your people. History is replete with examples. I've seen it over and over again. Unfortunately, I see it too often. So you can do it that way, but you'll never be extraordinary. Not only will you not be extraordinary, but you will never release the full potential of those who work for you if you don't have that genuine concern. So I want to think a little bit with you about this leadership and love, how it connects, mainly through stories. Let me start with a story about General John Lejeune. You know him? 13th Commandant of the Marine Corps, well known for preparing the Marine Corps for what they were going to have to face in World War II. I actually walked outside from Luce Hall coming by, and I went past the Stockdale statue and the Lawrence statue, and then coming around the bend to come here was the little Lejeune statue. I always feel bad for Lejeune. You know, he looks like he needs to get pumped up a little bit, you know, to get bigger, because he was a giant when it comes to leadership, but he gets dwarfed by those other, those other big statues. Well, Lejeune was not just Commandant of the Marine Corps, he was also a division commander in World War I. And he had responsibility on the front along the Meuse River in France. And he was there in November of 1918 when the ceasefire was going to be called, and eventually that would lead to the end of World War I. The day after the ceasefire is called, General John Lejeune visits his division field hospital. And he's walking through that division field hospital when he sees a sergeant who has an amputated leg. So he walks over to the sergeant, and he looks at the sergeant and says, what happened to you? The sergeant looks up at General Lejeune and says, sir, we were in a firefight yesterday at one of the bridges over the Meuse River. And there was some artillery fire and small arms fire. It cut into my leg, and when I was brought to the field hospital last night, they decided to save my life. They needed to amputate the leg. So General Lejeune said, did you say that took place yesterday? Sergeant said, yes, sir. He said, did you know that a ceasefire was going to be called at any moment yesterday? That was going to be the end? Sergeant said, yes, sir. That was common knowledge on the front. So he said, what induced you then to go across that bridge knowing what you knew? That it was just about all over. Didn't really matter. The sergeant said, General, our battalion commander, Captain Dunbeck, called us onto the friendly side of the Meuse and pointed to the bridge. And he said, I've been given the order to take that bridge and secure it. I'm going across that bridge, and I expect you all to come with me. And then the sergeant, with tears welling up in his eyes, looked at General Lejeune and said, sir, what could we have done? We certainly weren't going to let the captain go across that bridge by himself. We loved him too much for that. John Lejeune wrote about that story, and he said this when he wrote about that very story in World War I. He said, I've always felt that the incident I have just narrated gives one a better understanding of the meaning and practice of leadership than do all the books that have been written and all the speeches that have been made on the subject. I was amazed when I read this. As a Marine, one of the things I helped do was to start up the Lejeune Leadership Institute down in Quantico, Virginia. As part of that, I read everything I could about Lejeune, all his letters, all his speeches, what other people said about him. He was an amazing man, and he talked a lot about love and affection when it came to leadership. But in this particular writing, he said, if I take all the books that have been written and all the speeches that have been made, this incident is what leadership is about. The love between the leader and the led